Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I didn't even know you were opening space.
Yeah, I decided to do it a couple of days ago. I wasn't sure if I was gonna have time today, but I've got a little bit of time, so
Okay. So I just want to clarify which Jesse Michels, and I think isn't it Michels? Isn't it Michels? I think maybe. Which podcast are we referring to?
so that this was the podcast with him and Diana Pasulka. It's kind of an older one. Um it was kind of I think he kind of did it before anybody really knew who Colonel Nell was. Or just as Colonel Nell was coming out and talking about things, maybe. Yeah.
And I'm not.
And I had anyway. So like in that thread, I had a bunch of people who were asking me questions, trying to um get to the bottom of like what uh what what exactly did he mean by those comments. And so I just wanted to kind of hold a room and kind of talk about my interpretation of those. Um,
Hey, Matthew, before we move forward, I just wanted to let you know it was
hey,
11
how's
months
it going?
ago that the American Alchemy. Good to see you. I was talking earlier, but I was muted. The title of it is called "The Biblical Truth of UFOs and Angels," featuring Karl Nell and Diana Pasulka on American Alchemy, and it was posted about 11 months ago.
Oh, okay, good. Well, there you have it.
It's being recorded. I figured that was for posterity.
Yeah.
If just as a chat, in case you want to start this completely clean with that, clarification in place, just don't hesitate. So,
No, I mean, I think that this is fine. I mean, it's kind of like a last minute room. It's not anything that I really totally plan to do, but um, so I think that this is good enough.
and just so you know, just again, in case for posterity, in case it's important to you, it is Michels.
Yeah, I know. I never won a spelling bee as a child, so
Okay.
don't don't hold that against me. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get into it. There's some people who are going to listen later. It's recorded if anyone wants to listen to it. It doesn't look like anyone else is even here, so that's good. The fewer people, the better, I think.
It's hey, look, it's the Friday night fight night on UFO Twitter. So yeah, there's
Oh, is it really?
well, yeah, often seems to be Friday nights to go night. So
Oh, is it? I didn't know that. I did not know that.
Let's start some UFO beefs.
Yeah, so basically what uh Karl Nell said in that interview, and I kind of talked about how these are the most important public comments he's made on the topic because they are. Um, uh, and a lot of people don't realize it yet. If they ever will, I have no idea. So anyway, what he said was he was talking about kind of the largest collection of religious texts in the world, from any religion, living or dead, is the pyramid texts from Egypt. And he goes on to say that, kind of Western thought, when they went into Egyptology, they wanted to kind of put a materialistic viewpoint on the study of Egyptology. And so they kind of took these texts and they described them as funerary, right? Because, the texts are full of depictions of mummies and things like that, and people wrapped as mummies, including things like the Book of the Dead, right? Which, if you actually translate the title of that book into English, they didn't call it the Book of the Dead. The Egyptians didn't call it that. It was called the Book of Coming Forth into the Light by Day. Something to that effect. right? So basically what he says is that, we describe those documents as funerary, meaning that they were just for the purposes of death and funerals, and that's how they use this stuff. But he takes another interpretation of that, right? In that they are very esoteric, and that these are rites and rituals in which the living could participate within their lifetime. And what he's talking about there, and this is not weird, right? This is not woo. I'm taking the woo out of woo. And the way that I describe this is that, throughout, in terms of human development, we have different phases, different stages of development. You have infancy, then you come into adulthood, or you come into childhood, then adolescence, then finally adulthood. And in each one of those stages of human development, there's enormous changes in the brain. There's changes in perception and also in awareness, right? Awareness of the world around you. And so what I'm saying is that there's another stage in terms of evolutionary development. We don't often think of, well, what is the psychological development that goes along with evolutionary development? And so that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the psychological development that runs kind of congruently and alongside physical changes, right, within a species. Because that happens as well. We know it happens, right? You look at any other animal on the planet and you think about, well, how aware are they? Are they thinking animals? Can they, are they more like us? Can they ponder things? Can they see the beauty of a sunrise or a sunset? And so that's kind of where I'm coming at it from. And we can see that things like dogs, they lie in, like, you could say psychologically, they're like a 2-year-old. I'm sorry, I'm outside and there's like really loud music all of a sudden. Let me get some more quieter. If you guys want to chat for a second.
Completely fascinated by this topic. I don't have a whole lot of background with it, so that's why I was so intrigued and why I was replying to you about why, please speak more on this. It's not in my professional background, or yeah. Yes, we can.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
Okay, so what I'm saying is there's just this other phase beyond adulthood, and that's kind of what the world's religions are referring to. They're referring to entering into this phase that's beyond adulthood, and there are, like I said, huge changes in perception and awareness, and people, not all people, go through this, right? I think some people enter into a midlife crisis, which is kind of a failure to enter this change. And we know that this change is like, I think we can all remember the change that we went through when we were adolescents, right? There were huge shifts in perception. You suddenly went from, your parents taking care of everything to now you are forced to deal with all kinds of other things, right? You're forced to do for yourself much more. And so that becomes kind of something that you can draw a line to in terms of how this last change also takes effect, right? It's very emotional. It's wrought with all kinds of things. So anyway, And it, this is basically what it is, right? And so, the phenomenon is trying to help, my perception is the phenomenon is trying to help people enter into this final phase and come into a new kind of consciousness, right? Just as you did from infancy to childhood, childhood to adolescence, and adolescence to adulthood, right? It's just the way you raise your young, right? And so that's the basic gist of what he was saying there. And a lot of religions kind of form around this idea that you can shepherd people through this last change, right? And that's kind of what the Greco-Roman mysteries were about. That's what Christianity was about, certainly early Christianity, but not the way it's taught today, right? Today, and we look at world religions with this very materialistic worldview because that is our experience with religion, right? Like a lot of us in the United States, we grow up maybe Christian, or Christianity is kind of the religion within the United States. And it's taught in this very nonsensical, materialistic way, but it's actually very esoteric, just like the pyramid texts, right? And so it also has this idea built into it that you can transition from this phase of adulthood into something else, right? And that's what that religion did in the beginning. But now we see that it's taught in such a nonsensical way that it doesn't connect you to anything real anymore, right? It doesn't do that anymore. And so that's why it's dying, right? I mean, Diana Pasulka posted not too long ago a quote by, a kind of modern day Catholic theologian who said, the Christian of the future will be a mystic, or he won't be Christian. In other words, like, if Christianity can't connect you with this stuff, it's going to die, just like all the religions before it, because it's not based on anything real. And so that's basically what I was getting at with this post, and I believe that that's what Karl Nell was getting at as well. Does that answer your questions, Noah? Or does that clarify things for you?
It helps, but the thing that is still kind of the why of
Are you
why that's
speaking?
some
I
of his
can't. I
most.
can't hear you. Can anybody else hear him?
Do you hear me?
Noah, you might have to recycle. Just leave the room and come back.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one of the. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
All right, cool. Now I've got you. So the primary question that I had from that thread that we were discussing was why this one point is so important. Is that because of the risk of other world religions falling away, or like I feel like I'm just kind of missing the point a little bit there on those specific comments and why because to me I'm stuck on the nuts and bolts and where are they from and what do they look like and what do they eat for dinner and all that stuff. But so that's the part that I'm just having a little bit hard time connecting. Maybe I'm just dense, but I'm very intrigued. I'm loving this conversation so far.
Yeah, so the reason I think that that's the most important thing he's ever said is because as I was speaking to someone else the other day and talking about this, kind of privately, you can tell people and publish scientific papers about the nuts and bolts of this stuff, and that's all well and good, right? You can read a magazine article sitting waiting at the dentist's office about this stuff. You can go online and read an article about it. But then once you've read that article about the nuts and bolts, it's done, right? That's all. There's nothing else for you in that, right? In other words, so what's important about this, right, is the fact that there is something there for everyone. There's something there actionable for everyone in their everyday lives. Does that make sense? So that's why the phenomenon, although people want to look at the nuts and bolts and they're fascinated by that, there's nothing actually actionable for the everyday person there, right? But if you look at it from this perspective, from the religious perspective, and what it's actually trying to tell you, then there is something that's actionable there. There's something real, something that you can apply as an everyday person to your everyday lives. And that's how it's applicable to you, right? It's not necessarily the technology. And that's why I think it's so important. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. So the almost like a guided shepherding is the takeaway as compared to the other things that we can't have as much control over independently. Is that just?
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, not everyone is going to be a scientist working on the nuts and bolts, right? like I said, it's a neat thing to see. But if you're not a physicist or a chemist or in some profession that's applicable to the nuts and bolts, then there's really nothing else there for you, other than just an entertaining read while you're waiting at the dentist's office, and so that's what I was getting at. And that's why those comments in particular are the most important things he's ever said publicly, right, about the phenomenon.
It comes from a place of knowledge with him. It seems like more so than a place of speculation. The way that he talks, it's interesting.
Well, yeah, because like I said, some of us have had like personal contact with the phenomenon, and these are the things that we report, right? That everything that I'm telling you now, that there's something actionable there for everyone, in that you can then take this next step to beyond adulthood in terms of human development, and that's where we need to go. And I can kind of tie this to the other question that you and others were asking in that thread. And some people were saying, well, the phenomenon, because people who have contact experiences certainly vary in their opinions of the phenomenon, right? But
yeah.
But the reason for that, and I don't know that it's ever necessarily been explained this way, but you look at people who experience life, right? And they have varying different opinions of it, right? Someone might look at their life in the past and see all of this past trauma, and they're embittered by it, right? They've had this shitty life, is the way that they perceive it, right? And yet you have others, right, who then have all this trauma in their background, but then they turn that around to motivate them to become a better human being, right? And you can certainly see that. And I mean, there's a certain wisdom that arises within people like that, right? And the public can notice that. They become poets, they become, authors, they help other people, they're very altruistic. And so the same is true with the phenomenon, right? You can have someone who encounters the phenomenon, and the phenomenon, we aren't prepared for the lessons that it teaches us, because when we think of learning, right, we think of, you go and sit in a classroom in front of a teacher, and they kind of spout to you what the truth of the world and the universe are, right? But that's not the truth of it, right? The universe is an experience. It's an experience first, and the experience is where we get our science, right? Someone experiences something, and then science can then go in and kind of measure that very specifically, and kind of dissect it, and so the experience always comes first. That's why I tell people, if you're looking for answers as to what the phenomenon is and how it operates, you need to look at the humanities, because that ultimately is what tells you. Because those of us who have had contact with the phenomenon knows that the phenomenon teaches us in the same way life teaches us through experience, right? And because the phenomenon realizes that is the only way to actually teach someone something so that they know it for themselves, right? It's not something you can sit in a classroom and someone teaches you, right? In the same way that I'm sitting here teaching you about this stuff, right? It when you're in it, right? And you're in contact with the phenomenon, it's one thing to say that it teaches us as in the same way that life teaches us, and it's a totally another thing to live that experience. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So that's why I wrote my book, right? I was like, what does contact look like as a lived experience? And so that's what my book is about, right? Contact as a lived experience through the lens of, the past, through the lens of Greek and Roman myth and Christianity and just the rich humanities. So anyway, the other question you had asked and others had asked in this thread is, why, how do you know that the phenomenon doesn't have ill intent, right? And I said something to the effect that I believe it's an evolutionary impossibility,
Right.
that is the truth. And I told you that there really wasn't enough room in X comments to kind of explain this. So I kind of want to lay that out.
Sure.
based
And on that,
what
I wasn't coming back at you super hard. For me, it was just, I think it's possible. I don't know that it's impossible. So I felt like we agreed
Right.
on like 95 or 98%. And it was just that last couple percent that I wanted to know about.
Yeah, and so I kind of wanted to explain my kind of perception of that, and how I perceive that that's an evolutionary impossibility. And so when I was going through my contact experiences, that was my first thought, right? It was terrible. It was awful. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is maybe all this stuff about evil is true, maybe that's what this is. But then I started to think to myself, well, this is like very high technology, right? And I started to look for answers, and I thought to myself, well, I looked at myself is what I did. And I said, if these beings were coming down here just to torture me and torment me for shits and giggles, right? I thought, well, that's not something that I would do now, personally. I don't get shits and giggles that way, right? That's not ever something, I wouldn't do that to a dog. I wouldn't do that to anyone, or anything, right? I just don't have that in me. And so I kind of looked at the bell curve of humanity and I thought, well, who would get shits and giggles out of doing that kind of thing? And you look at the bell curve of like where on the low point at the left, you've got people who are in prison, who are the most violent among us, who might get kicks out of torturing people. And then you have, like, as the bell curve goes up, people like me, right? And as the bell curve comes down, people who are much more altruistic, caring, loving, people like nurses, doctors, first responders, people that really care about the human race. And I thought to myself, I looked at our technology and how our technology is kind of destroying us, even though we have this whole, right side of this bell curve where people don't get shits and giggles out of that. There's still this left side, more primitive side of the bell curve where people do those things. And I thought, well, if they were able to develop technology beyond ours, that bell curve would look much different, right? Where you might have at the right end of that bell curve people like me, right? And so as being the more primitive among them, right? And then on the left hand of that bell curve, you might have people who give 100% of themselves, right? And then everybody else is kind of in between. But none of those people would be the types of people who would get shits and giggles out of coming down here and just torturing people. And so that's kind of how I arrived at that decision. And I thought, I don't think that's possible in a society like that, that's able to have such high technology and not be destroyed by it, right? In other words, they have not destroyed themselves with this. And this has been with them for a long time because they've been in contact with us for a long time. So that seems to lend itself to some kind of stability within their civilization or their governments, their whatever they have, right? And so that's why I kind of looked at that and I thought, well, that's got to be then the case. This is, and so that's why I changed my mind about what I was going through. I was like, so this isn't torture. So then what is it? It's got to be something else. There's some other point to this, right? And so that's why I kind of stuck with it and kept going. And at one point I got so frustrated with it, I was like, forget it. I don't want this contact anymore. I'm done with it. And I was laying in my bed, and I had gone to sleep. So I was so pissed. I was just totally angry. I'm working at O&I at this point, right? And I'm like, I don't want this anymore. I don't know what it is. I don't know where it's going. This is after months and months of contact, right? And just being terrified all the time. And I'm like, I'm tired of it. I'm done. Don't do it again. I don't want to see you again. And so that night, I wake up in my bed, paralyzed, just like I always am when they're around, right? And there's this little man standing there at my bedside. The way I describe him in my book is that he looked like a yard gnome. I mean, that's like the only way I could describe him. And he's standing there. Yeah, he had a beard, like a locked beard and locked hair, white hair.
Wow.
And he was looking at me and I was looking at him and I was just so instantly angry, right? That he was there because they're back, right? Even though I didn't want it anymore. And he said to me, don't give up, keep going, right? And then kind of put me back to sleep. And I thought to myself the next morning, well, he's got to know something I don't know, right? There's something he knows that I don't know, and I'll go ahead and continue with this, whatever this is, right? And so I continued, right? And I eventually reached a point where I understood, right? And we know what adolescence looked like. It was emotional, it was difficult,
Irrational.
yeah. It's just full of all of those things, right? You just go a little bit crazy, and everybody kind of accepts that, right? About adolescence, we allow them to go a little bit crazy because we've all been there, right? We understand. That's what it is. As they work through these things coming into adulthood, right? And so this last change is no different, right? I was kind of rebellious against it. I didn't want it. And many experiencers feel that way. But if you don't continue, right, then you kind of stagnate and you are kind of left there, and you may end up actually being less whole in the end than you were before, right? You could end up a very kind of broken human being. And we don't often see like children and people going into, well, we do see actually people who get stuck in adolescence and they're adults, right? They're very childish, very toxic individuals, right? And so you see the same thing with this change, right? You see that people don't always get through it, and sometimes they're at the end they become very bitter people because of it. And so that's why you have this varied experience within the experiencer community, because not everyone reaches kind of the end state where it bears fruit and you're kind of like, oh, that's what this was all about, right? And so given that context, it seems a little ridiculous, right? that people have been, that as some have claimed, that people have been killed over this secret, or that, I kind of believe that ufology actually was created as kind of a a way to make the phenomenon even more nonsensical, right? To take it out of its context where it belongs and kind of its psychological, kind of spiritual, religious framework, and make it something that it's not, right? It just aliens from outer space, right? That are just here to experiment on us, and isn't that awful, right? To keep people from going through this change, which I think is just it's awful. It's just awful, and I don't know that that's necessarily their goal, but I think that's certainly what has ended up happening with a lot of people. So anyway, those are my thoughts, Noah. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
That does, and I have a couple questions. I haven't read your book. I'm sorry, I will. I had so the little person that you saw, the gnome looking person, is that the same type of person that you saw in your other encounters? Was it the same group of people?
No, so I saw different kinds all the time, and one of the things that, but you know, experiencers tend to report the same kinds of things. People who maybe had no interest in this topic at all, suddenly are reporting, you know, the same kinds of things that people report when they encounter the phenomenon in a personal context, right? And so, you know, the gnome is something that people see. They see the people with blue skin.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
Do the gnome
you know,
people have a common name?
no, I don't think so. But you know, it's interesting because there aren't a whole lot of people a lot of people report grays, and honestly, I never saw anything that I would describe as a gray. I've seen certainly the very tall, thin, in a black uniform with big eyes. I wouldn't describe that as a gray. I mean, because I saw his big eyes, and I noticed that all of the entities that I saw, that I was able to see their face, they were all wearing these goggles of some kind. It's probably some kind of technology, because I could see that there was a light, like a glowing light within them. I don't know what that was. I don't know what those are for or what they do, but they were certainly all wearing that.
So the reason that I had the couple percent of questioning or difference about the nefarious side is I get shown a lot of reels on social media, and today I saw a reel in Asia of a giant lobster that was getting caught at a marketplace, and it was dispatched live, but it was not killed in a humane way. And the lobster were suffering, like happens with a lot of the food that we have that we just treat as food, but are also living beings. So to me, not even from a, like, we don't think about our dinner in those types of humanistic terms because we can't. Otherwise, we wouldn't eat anymore. So perhaps, I guess, is my thought that there's something that feeds on us in a way that they just don't view it that way because of that predator prey relationship. I don't know that I believe this, but there are people do talk about maybe a group, and I think it's the reptilians, but I don't know which ones yet, that feed off of negative energy or despair or things like that. So perhaps that was the couple percentage points of wiggle room. Perhaps there's an entity out there, a species out there, that feeds off of either whatever you call a soul or a life force or whatever, in a way that for them is existential, and for us it makes us food. So that was kind of my. Would most of them be altruistic? I would think so, but I also would think that in a universe that seems to have a mirror image of almost everything, you know, you've got this side, you got, acids and base. In order for there to be base, there has to be acid. So in order for altruism, there might have to be nefariousness. That was kind of my my thought process there. Not that I necessarily believe that's happening here or that it is happening to us or whatever, but it just that it could. Um, when were your contacts happening? What time frame? Like what years?
I was 2017 into 2018.
That's
Mm,
recent. Holy smokes!
Yeah, so that was when I was working at the Office of Naval Intelligence when this was happening to me. Uh, so yeah, it was 2017 into 2018, and then I wrote the book in 2020. But I will say this, right? You talked about how, and this is kind of a popular view that there are entities that feed on, bad feelings or whatever. And so you got to think about when you were a teenager, right? And how that felt. And it felt bad, right? You felt bad. I and there's no getting around that. We all know what that is. We all did that. And so the same is true with this change, right? And yet, um, people don't recognize it as a psychological change or a psychological expansion. Um, and they see that as they're starting to feel bad, right, these entities show up. Um, and what isn't really necessarily understood about that is that when you are changing, right, when you're going through one of these transformations, that depression and those kind of bad feelings are the brain changing, right? That's where the brain's plasticity is it becomes much more malleable. And so, of course, these entities show up when you're going through this to kind of try and help you get there, right? Because there's certain things that you obviously would not do on your own willingly if you didn't realize that there was a point to doing it. And so they kind of create this situation where you're able to do those things and get through it. And it just so that happens that it coincides with this depression because that's when your brain is malleable and going through these changes. And so that's when they show up. And so people associate the two and automatically assume that that's what's happening, right? But
Like the dentist
that,
caused my cavity because I had to go to the dentist to get my cavity worked on.
right, exactly. And it's like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? It's the same thing. Um, and so that's what's happening there. But those kind of reports are usually reported by people who never reach the end, right? Because for whatever reason, they aren't able to matriculate and make sense of the things that are happening to them psychologically, in such a way that they're able to then disintegrate themselves and then put themselves back together, just as you do in each one of these phases where you have massive changes in perception, expanses in awareness.
It sounds like ego death with psychedelics. That's what it sounds like.
Right. That is exactly what it is. Right. And the thing about psychedelics that I will say, and one of the reasons why I don't like them is because so you can take the psychedelics, right? And you will arrive at a place, right, where you arrive at the end point, right? And you haven't done any of the disintegration, any of the personality disintegration and then rebuilding that is required for one of these changes. So you can do psychedelics and isn't the world wonderful? And then you wake up the next morning and you're the same asshole you were 2 days ago, right? It doesn't fundamentally change you because that you didn't tear down that scaffolding in the mind and then rebuild it in a better way, right? In order to change your perception. And so so you kind of look at that and you think, well, the psychedelics are the key. And just like the person who never finishes and believes that there are entities that feed on their bad feelings, there are people who believe that it's only the psychedelics and that's where it's at. But I will say that, within these, and I see John's hand up, I will say that the psychedelics can be very helpful in this way. They can be very helpful in that, and they used them throughout the Greco-Roman mysteries. But I think what they did was they would use these things, right, to give you kind of a taste of it, right? And then knowing that that is real will then sometimes spur on the change, and it will cause the change to happen within you. And this is kind of recognized in terms of psychology today. They call it drug-induced psychosis, right? And that's what they will diagnose you with, because you'll start to see entities, you'll start to see things that aren't there, you'll become very paranoid, very emotional. And so you'll start to go through this change sometimes months after taking the drug. Go ahead, Wolf.
Yeah, there's a very complex set of ideas to be broken down here. In other cultures and when these things are used, they're known as medicines, and they actually do take you to the center of your spiritual experience and or life experience and show you what has been happening and the reasons why. So you're actually presented in these cases with a life sort of narrative that helps you understand the who, what, when, where, why of how you have become the person that you are. And that is the process that then you engage post-ceremony to make those alterations and changes. So in spiritual context, they are known as agents of, or entheogens, which means the spirit within. So, of course, some people do take things recreationally, just like anything else. But the net effect, when used intentionally, you do engage these processes. And there are, of course, many other initiatory protocols and stuff like that. People can access these states. Very infrequently do people end up in a sort of psychotic state from taking these things. It's actually very, very rare. But some people don't react, and it's usually when that happens, a reaction with Western medicine drugs that they've been prescribed and they didn't wean themselves off of before they actually did an intentional psychedelic.
I agree with that. That's I do think that the part of the reason that Western medicine views the psychedelics the way that they do is propping up Western pharmaceuticals as well. My personal opinion on the way that psychedelics work is I think that they're a bridge to a communication that kind of like this space that we're at here. It allows you to access a space where there's multiple entities happening, because our brains are so different, and none of the drugs that we have work the same on everybody. That's why we have side effect warnings. Yet most people that engage in the psychedelics at a certain level seem to report the same thing. So almost like with experiencers, if it seems like there's something to it, otherwise why is it so uniform? I think that you can I don't know if I believe you might be able to get into contact with certain entities through the use of psychedelics. And my suspicion on that is just with the frequency changes that happen in your brain, just like with a different radio frequency on your radio, you just click into that. But I've never taken a medical class in my life, so take that with a grain of salt.
So just from the perspective, and let's just use ayahuasca as an example right now. When it is used ritualistically and shamanically in other cultures, it opens up a state of consciousness that gives you access to alternate and expanded information systems. So, for example, in South America, when people take ayahuasca, the shaman see this. The forest is their medicine cabinet. It is their knowledge base, and it is also a form of medicine and food. And the components of ayahuasca, for example, are you can have Banisterios caapi, and you can have the DMT containing plants. There could be a few different kinds. But Banisteriopsis caapi, when it was first discovered, with the harmine and harmaline components in it, was nicknamed telepathine, by the ethnobotanists that discovered it, because
Wow.
when they took it, they realized that they were having telepathic communication experiences with not only other people around them, but with the plant spirits themselves. And the whole notion in that framework is sort of like animism, and that all of nature is represented by these spirits and these other intelligences that will share information with you if you're in the right state and have the right intention. So when you enter into these states, of course, we know not only from clinical studies that happen, like with Rick Strassman, but also from the shaman that recognize these entities. And these beings and the ships show up in their artwork. You can look at the artwork of how they transmit their cultural experience as iconography in the artwork, and you can see the ships and beings. So they are far, far, far more advanced than us in their understanding of this sort of other layer of reality and that they're interacting with, which also interacts at the physical, spiritual, and medical level with individuals.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, John. That was well said. And you know, and I don't necessarily have anything against the psychedelics. I will say that again. It's just that a lot of people will take them. They'll be like, "Oh, it's Friday night. Let's drop some shrooms," or Saturday night. You know, it's like that's not what this is for, right? And if you do that, you're really kind of playing Russian roulette, because there's no telling what's going to happen afterwards. Drug-induced psychosis is a real thing, and if you take these drugs at the right time of year, you know, with kind of curious intention, you may find yourself in a situation you don't want to be in, and that you are not prepared for, and it can ruin your life. And good luck finding some kind of ritual elder that knows all this stuff, you know, because all you knew was it's Friday night and you're going to do some shrooms, right? And that's what I have against it. That it's just used so flippantly and, you know, just without care and without any kind of regard whatsoever.
I think you only do that once, though, because after that, you learn your lesson. Paul Stamets talks about that psychedelic mushrooms are inherently non-addictive and non-habit forming, because if you take more and more, they do build up a tolerance, but if you take more and more, you eventually learn why you shouldn't do that.
Right. And so I'm not sure, does anybody else have anything that they wanted to discuss, or anybody down there want to come up on stage?
It's a fascinating talk.
Yeah, I usually like to keep these pretty limited, though. I won't I don't typically like to engage with the public for hours and hours and hours on end. Just because I'm not sure that that's productive, but
Sure.
Go ahead, Wolf.
Yeah, so there was, I think, what has been underplayed so far, but will turn out to be extremely important. A fundamental discovery was announced on December 2nd, and I'll just read out the short version. And it's about the Bennu asteroid discovery. So on December 2nd, 2025, NASA announced a groundbreaking analysis of samples from asteroid Bennu collected by the OSIRIS-REx mission. Scientists discovered ribose, the 5-carbon sugar that forms RNA's backbone, alongside previously identified nucleobases, phosphates, and amino acids. This completes the set of all key molecular building blocks needed to assemble RNA, the molecule central to the RNA world hypothesis for life's origins. It suggests these prebiotic chemicals were abundant in the early solar system, potentially delivered to Earth via asteroids, fueling the emergence of life. While not proof of extraterrestrial life, it strengthens evidence that life's ingredients are cosmic commons. And the study has been thus far published in Nature Geoscience and Nature Astronomy. And we basically sent out this probe that basically barely brushed by this asteroid. It blew, I can't remember, it was some kind of gas that it blew at the asteroid, stirred up some dust. They captured the dust, and then they returned the probe to Earth. So this is actually incredibly significant because, of course, over the last few years, they've discovered some of the other amino acids, but now we have evidence of these precursor elements that are fundamental to life existing within our own solar system. So this would lend itself very, very well to the idea of panspermia and a different origin of life on planet Earth. Rather than the start being with DNA, it's more likely that it was RNA. So it's a significant and important discovery. And RNA, of course, is the backbone of all life on the planet. About 8 to 10% of the human genome is made up of viruses that have fundamentally, altered and changed our evolutionary process. And it also works in a cross-species exchange of information scenario as well, where different species share fundamental processes and affect evolution on the larger scale. So this, I think, will turn out to be a large part of the phenomenon, the things that we're looking at with all of this.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that those types of things are fascinating. And I think, I mean, obviously, life is everywhere, right? I don't believe for 1 second that there isn't a populated planet in the next solar system over. I think wherever you have a star, you're going to have something that looks like Earth. Whether you like to believe that or not, I think that that's probably the truth of it. Yeah.
Hey, Matthew, I had one more question for you. Actually, like two, I think. Oh shoot, it just left me. You were mentioning like this potentially being like a growth an initializer or something. Were you going through something in that point in your life where when you started having your experiences that is symbolic? Was there a moment of change, a moment of growth that you were trending towards that you can go back and go, oh, that seems like it was why?
Yeah, I mean, so normally this change, which I didn't know it at the time, right? But normally this change will take effect in sometime in the 30s, and I was about 38, 39 at the time. So, that's the perfect time to be going through this. And so I started to, at that time in my life, I was starting to question certain things, right? Like I had been working in intelligence and in the military, and I had kind of been, wondering. Inevitably you start to wonder these types of questions, like when do we catch the last bad guy, right? When does this end, right? And it was very depressing to kind of think of those things, because it's like, well, you start to look at it and you just realize this doesn't end, right? This never ends, right? This is going to be never ending. This has always been going on throughout human history. This constant battle of like perceived good and evil, right? And what is that, right? And so I started to ask these kinds of big questions of myself, and it was depressing, and I started to get very depressed, even though like I was set, I was at a place in my life where I was just financially much better off than most people. So, I mean, I had rental properties, I had a good job, right? I had 100% stability, and yet I was like miserable. So that didn't really make any sense to me. And then I had like this near death experience, right? When I first got to O&I had these. I had a saddle pulmonary embolism that almost killed me. And in my book, I say that I think that it did actually kill me one night, but that there was some intervention there, and I was shown that later. So, that happened. So that's where I was at my life in that point, right? I spent some time in the ICU. It was terrible. You know, so that's where I was at in my life when this started to happen to me, which is not uncommon, at that age. A lot of people will begin to ask themselves those kinds of questions
Right.
because you've had at that point in your life, most people have had a family, the kids have grown up, they've left the house, they're off at college, and so now suddenly you're left coming back to your house and a click in a ticking clock in the background. You know what I mean? And it's like, okay, is this it? Yeah, exactly. Because you've done all of the things that society tells you are going to make you happy and make you feel wonderful inside, and yet you don't.
Right.
Right. And there's something that's not right. And it's very unsettling and uneasy, right? And I was talking to somebody the other day about that feeling, and it was I sent them a clip from a movie. It was a clip from the movie V for Vendetta about this feeling of like impending doom and what it feels like. And I feel like it was articulated very well in this movie because the movie is actually about everything that I'm talking about. It's about going through that change. You can describe it as initiatory, spiritual, whatever you want. But I think they articulated it very well in that movie. It was the scene where like Evie is coming out of captivity that V has kept her in, right? And the way that they articulate what that kind of feels like and what that change when it's upon you, what it's feeling like. And he said something to the effect that you thought this feeling you had, you thought it was anger, but it was something else. There was something more, right? And you gave up your life, and you also realized that even after that there was something more, right? And it's like oh my God, they totally articulated that really, really well. Because you're always asking yourself, is this it? Right? Is that all there is to it? Right? So anyway, it was just a very good scene, and if anybody's curious, I would highly recommend that movie. Watching it through the lens of psychological change and through the lens of initiation, that is exactly what the movie's about, and it's a wonderful movie in that sense. So, have we got anything else?
Well, my last question on that would be, do you? So if it's a growth thing, does that mean that everybody gets these abduction things, or is it only certain people that need that sort of a breakthrough?
Okay, so that's where it starts to get kind of hairy, right? Because what I have realized and kind of what I've pinpointed is that you not everybody does get this, right? As I said, like some people will start to have these feelings and then they'll go out and buy, the sports car that was hot when they were a kid, right? To try and recapture their youth. They'll distract themselves from it, right? Something to distract themselves from it, and so that they don't have to deal with it. And what I've realized about that is, in particular, is that the mechanism, the psychological mechanism which allows you to go through the change is the exact same psychological mechanism that will prevent you from going through the change. In that, when you were an adolescent and you kind of had to disassemble yourself psychologically and then put yourself back together on the other end of that, the how do I say this? I guess the ability to do that and how well you can do that will determine whether or not you make it through the other side, right? And so So what we would call that is like the ability to integrate trauma, right? And so if you can't do that, you'll push it off, right? You'll ignore it and just make it go away. You'll distract yourself because you don't want to do that, because it's a painful kind of thing to do. You did it in your adolescence and you don't want to go back there, right? And so for that reason, not everyone goes through it. But if you are really good at doing that, right, and you do that every day, and this phenomenon, this psychological mechanism, there was a book written about it. It's called Positive what is it called? No, it's Personality Shaping Through Positive Disintegration, and it was written by a Polish psychologist. He calls it positive personality disintegration. And this Polish psychologist, I mean, if anyone would know about it, it would be him. He, during World War II, spent some time in a Nazi concentration camp because he was an intellectual. So he was arrested by the Nazis and interred in a camp. He ended up surviving that, and then came out the other end and wrote this book, which is brilliant. And I highly recommend it. But anyway, so your ability to do that will not only determine whether or not you enter the process, but also whether or not you finish the process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. If you're not ready for this, we can't even get you that. We can't even try it. Or if you're not even willing to try, we can't try it.
Right. And if you don't know how to tear down to tear down that inner scaffolding and then rebuild it, there's no point in even entering this initiation, because you're not going to get it, right? And so we're not going to waste our time. And that's why I think that this is such an important conversation, because we can teach people to do that, right? That can be taught. Mostly people will learn that kind of thing through psychological modeling. In other words, you come across people in your life that you recognize can do this, right? And you kind of watch them and you model that. And you kind of do that kind of unconsciously, but it's like something that draws you to this person, and you kind of watch how they handle issues or traumas, and you see how they deal with it. And so you model that, right? And you become good at that. And you, like I said, nobody really articulates these things, but this is what we do every day. We psychologically model other people that we see have some kind of psychological ability that we don't, right? And it's something that we want to see in ourselves. And so we'll pick that apart and we'll model it. And we don't really think about it, but we do it, right? So yeah, there's that.
That's fascinating. I really appreciate you jumping on and doing all this. We've got quite a few listeners right now.
Yeah, there's a few.
A lot of people have added.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody wants to come up and add to the conversation, you're more than welcome to.
Any questions? Anything?
Yeah. John or Y Wolf, go ahead.
Yeah. One of the interesting curiosities that Matthew and I share in our experiences is at the time that I had a major encounter with a phenomenon, it did something similar, because Matthew mentioned his pulmonary saddle embolism, and I had a DVT. My blood effectively was cooked, and I ended up with extremely thick blood. It ended up in my lungs. The doctor that basically saved my life said that it was almost a miracle that less than 20% of the people survive that kind of a thing. And that was associated with an experience that I had, where I ended up with a triangular mark on my arm. And since then, I've been on blood thinners, because there's no family history, no genetic reason that I'd be having this. But that one experience hit me pretty hard. So, and I know Matthew had the same thing within the proximity of time that's his as well.
Yeah, that's true. And I also, the hematologist at the hospital, I was at Bellevue in the ICU. The hematologist that saw me came in and he said, "I don't know how you survived this." He was like, he told me about how there was a young lady who came in with the same thing, and she didn't have as much obstruction as I did. and she ended up having a stroke, and she wasn't going to survive. So there's that. I mean, and those things are, it can really weigh on you. That becomes very heavy, to be honest. But Brendan, you came up on stage. Did you have anything to add?
I was just going to say something quickly, harking back to what you were talking about before about ufology and all of these other aspects that are out there. And I actually think that the answer is pretty simple for why all of those things are around. And that is that initiation is inherently subversive. The the way that I see things, I don't see how the structures that we have in society today would survive if every second person you met on the street had actually gone through initiation. So all of these other distractions and so on, maybe they're a part of that. And maybe it's also part of something you brought up on your recent interview that you did in I forget who it was, with John Coleman, where you said, if everyone's living in Candyland, there's no way to learn anything. So you have to have challenges to overcome. But I think it's actually as simple as that. I really do. Initiation is subversive. You can't look at people the same way after you've gone through it. You can't look at the way people organize and treat each other the same way. And you can't look at yourself the same way either. And you refuse to accept that the sort of things that you used to accept before you went through it. So that's the way I kind of look at it. I don't know whether you think that's a reasonable summary, but I think it's about as simple as that.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, and that there has to be, in order for there to be growth, there has to be some adversity, right? Which is what kind of the initiatory experience and what life teaches us, right? That you learn and you grow psychologically through adversity, right? That's what makes you stronger. And there's all kinds of analogies, spiritual analogies about this, like the tree that never encountered wind, right? And so it didn't grow strong roots. And so the slightest breeze just blows it over and it's dead. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what that analogy is about. And so it's about kind of integrating these types of experiences into something more useful and something that makes you stronger. And ultimately, if you can't do that, then obviously you don't reach the end and it doesn't bear fruit. You just kind of blow over and you're done. So yes, all things. Did you have anything?
Yeah, I did. First of all, great to see you again, Matthew. I hope everything's been going good. And thanks for hosting the space. So I was doing a little research on something today, and I came across a couple of reports and historical UFO data that just kind of caught my attention, and they were all from 1949 and from the White Sands area. And the first several were from a Air Force personnel named McLaughlin, and he kind of faded away and seemed to have got transferred maybe somewhere else. But then another name caught my attention just a few months earlier, Charles B. Moore. I did not realize that Charles B. Moore, who the Air Force basically used as kind of like here's why Project Mogul explains the Roswell incident in their Roswell report. I did not realize that he had UFO sightings at White Sands during missile tests and things of that nature. And his reports basically sound a lot like what we would call modern Tic Tac sightings. So I wanted to ask you, do you have the sense that the military let's just take the Nimitz instance, that the military already knew about such a phenomenon? And if you do think so, how far back do you think it goes?
So do I think that the military at large knew about the phenomenon? I don't think that anyone at large knew about it. I think that there have always been certain people, right, who have been read into that and who knew. And I certainly think that there were people, at least one, read into those topics on board when these things happen that reach out back to their program and they say, hey, this is happening. I'm sure that that's the case. I don't have any kind of firsthand knowledge of that, but that would make sense to me just based on my knowledge of how kind of the IC works. So I don't know that everyone would have known this, but I think that there probably have always been certain individuals who have known it. And how far back do I think that goes? I think it goes back pretty far. How far, I don't know. I'm not sure. But this has been since the phenomenon has been with us the entire time, humanity, that is. I don't. I mean, I think that probably there was a certain point where probably government entities and officials and things like that began to take a serious look at it. I don't know when that started to happen. My suspicion would be probably prior to when everyone thinks it was. I don't know. I mean, because you can look at all kinds of old reports. You can even look at old newspaper articles where they'll talk in from like 1800s where people are talking about, oh, this or that ship just pulled into port and the sailors are reporting that they saw a meteor shower where there were meteors coming in and out of the water, right? But of course, like we all know, meteors don't come in and out of the water, right? Like that's not what meteors do. And yet here it is in a newspaper article from like 1850. You know what I mean? And so these things have always been going on. And so it wouldn't surprise me if these things weren't studied much earlier than we probably all think that they did. If sailors at sea have been seeing these types of things, certainly our Navy has been seeing these types of things for a very long time. Air Force after World War II, because the Air Force wasn't a thing until after World War II, but certainly sailors on the sea were seeing these things, right? So it wouldn't surprise me to know that interest in this topic dates back even that far, right? But like I said, I don't have any firsthand knowledge of that. I don't know, right? But I will say that it won't surprise me to learn that that's the case.
Have you had a chance to talk to any older veterans that had experiences, maybe let's say from the 40s or that era?
No, I haven't. I haven't spoken to any older veterans. I've spoken to plenty of people who are active duty now, and people who are freshly out that end up contacting me with stories of things that have happened. That's very common. And I will say that I think as time goes by, these types of occurrences at sea with our Navy are going to become more and more common, and with the military in general. And a lot of people look at that and they say, well, why the military, right? Why is it? And it's not just the military. I mean, civilians encounter this stuff. Everyone encounters this stuff. Wolf, did you have something?
Yeah, I for the room here, I'm wondering, because I think maybe you could just give a very short description of when you were in the services, your encounter with this in the framework of what you did, and then the two geographical regions, which would tend to support the idea that maybe this is something else of the world that these encounters took place with your Navy group.
Oh, yeah. So I was on the Theodore Roosevelt. I was a cryptologist in the Navy, and I was on the Theodore Roosevelt for the Gimbal event. right? And so I was privy to that. And so, but and to go back to what All Things was saying, not everyone on board knew what was happening, right? Not everybody on board knew that we were having these encounters with this stuff and that pilots were going up and taking a look at it. If you weren't working in the air wing in certain capacities, and if you weren't within the intelligence department on board, then you did not know what was going on. None of this was known to you at all. All you knew was we were in a workup cycle and we were done and we were heading home. That's all you knew. And so not everyone on board heard of this. So typically, that's why you have all kinds of intel personnel within the government that are coming out and talking about this, because these are the people who know, right? These are the people who see these things, that this is where those videos go. This is the people who know everything that's going on around the ship or around the world, right? And so, so we encountered that, and I watched the videos, right? And it was I had an emotional reaction to it. And then later on, we went on deployment, right? Because we were doing our workup cycle or our training for deployment. And so we're deployed, right? And we're in the Gulf. And, I'm headed to Civic, which is the Carrier Intelligence Center, with a bunch of crap in my hands. I think I was heading to a briefing or something. And I past one of my buddies who worked kind of more closely with the air wing, who had first drawn my attention to this, back during the workup cycle. And I was passing him in the hallway, and he said, he looks at me, he's like, "They're back," kind of like that poltergeist kind of voice. And I was like, "No way." And he's like, "Yep." And this was in passing, he was going the opposite direction of me, and I was like, man, and so I just continued on my way. I didn't look any further into it. I thought it was interesting, but at the same time, like, what am I going to do with that? I don't know what this is. I'm not read into that, whatever, so yeah, that's kind of my background and my story. And so that's why I say there was probably someone who was read into that on board, and they knew, right? And I would assume, I don't know who that individual was. I have no idea, right? But that's probably the case, knowing the way things work.
And what was the second region? Because I recall you mentioned there were two regions. So was it which Gulf was it for first or second encounter?
Oh, it was it depends who you ask, right? Because we name these things based on political views, but either you can call it either the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf. That's where we were, kind of right there between Iran, down by Dubai, Kuwait area, Saudi Arabia is there. I mean, that's where we were. And when we first encountered these on the workups, we were, off the coast of Florida. So that was two different, geographical regions where we encountered these things. And so it gets kind of ridiculous, that people say, "Oh, this is our technology and we were testing it," or whatever, because it's one thing to be off the coast of the United States and say it's a test, but it's another thing. It's a totally another thing if you say they're testing it in kind of a live fire situation, right? These jets are taking off and they're loaded with weaponry, right? They're not going to bake cookies now. We're done with our workup cycle. They've got guns loaded, missiles loaded, and so if you're talking about some kind of an asset, some kind of experimental asset that you've spent billions of taxpayer dollars on, are you really going to put that are you really going to inject that thing into this scenario, right? Where you could possibly get shot at, and ruin your one of a kind $1 billion asset. It's not going to happen, right? You would not do that. There's no way that would happen.
And
So yeah, I'll say that.
and for the purpose of the space, without getting into, whatever you can or can't say, your position allowed you to have an expanded knowledge that these things were happening in these different places.
Yeah, because like I said, I was within the intel department. I was a cryptologist. So, as a cryptologist in the Navy, everything I did all day long was done in a skiff, one of the skiffs on board. So everything was classified. And so that's where I first became aware of this, because we just had that knowledge based on the fact that we had a clearance and we needed to know, right? We needed to know what was happening around the ship because that was part of our job, to just be aware of everything, to know where we are, to know what's going on around us, to identify threats, and then tell others so that they could then take care of those threats. That was what my big part of my job was. So that's why I was aware that this was happening.
Matthew, I've got a question for you.
What's that now? I'm sorry.
Oh, just
I
thank
interrupt
you.
you.
Thank you for filling in that detail.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Bible.
I had a question. So, I don't know exactly the dates that the Gimbal happened. I'm remembering the New York Times article was 2017. You mentioned your experiences happened in 2017. Did Gimbal happen before those, or the events that you saw while out and deployed? Did those happen before you had your first encounter? Do you think you had a hitchhiker effect? If so, or help us understand that a little bit.
Yeah, actually, that's exactly what happened, right? So the Gimbal event itself actually took place in 2015. And and the reason why I had later, that's happened to me later in like 2017 is because, I was obviously being in the Navy and, my family knew kind of where I worked and that everything I did was not something public or that I could ever talk about. So anyway, like my brother contacts me in 2017 and he's like, oh, there's this New York Times article. He texts me this, right? There's this New York Times article talking about UFOs and the Navy, and there's footage. And I texted him back and I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll check it out. I secretly just did not even want to have this conversation with him because I knew in 2015 I had encountered that, right? And so then, like, I pull it up and I'm watching the footage and I'm like, holy shit, this is the same footage from 2015, right? And so I could not make sense of this because, like, that this was not typical of my job where I would encounter something at work in a skiff and then I would be reading about this in the New York Times, right? I mean, it would happen occasionally, right? Like, some kind of situation would be happening and you in my workspace I would have like a CNN on, Fox News or Al Jazeera, something, and we'd be working some situation and then like 20 minutes later we'll see it start to come across the tape at the bottom of the screen, like breaking news, this is happening or that's happening or whatever. So that was something that I would do. I'm sorry, what's the question? I've totally lost.
I
my
was
train of
asking
thought.
about a hitchhiker effect, and I was asking about the timelines of your first experience, the in-person ones you were talking about, versus the ones that we saw reported, like the Gimbal or the other deployed.
Right. So yeah, so 2015 was the Gimbal incident, and then I kind of put it in the back of my head because I wasn't read into that. I didn't know anything about it, so there was really nothing there that was actionable for me in my mind, right? So I just kind of forgot about it, and then 2017, I see that the New York Times article and the same footage, and so it was kind of disturbing to me. Like I don't know, it just I maybe you guys can't relate, but it made me feel very uneasy, right? To be watching this footage on my cell phone, knowing that I first encountered this in a skiff, and why is it on my cell phone now, right? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. And it almost was like kind of a bit of a panic moment, right? Because it's not supposed to happen. And so,
Because of breach of security?
yeah, because, things that happen behind closed doors don't typically get out, right? You're not working on something behind closed doors and then see it on your cell phone. Like that's just doesn't happen. It's so anyway, so I was a little bit shocked and taken back by that, but my brother ended up calling me. He's like, "Hey, did you see it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I saw the footage." And he was like, "Well, what do you think about that?" And like, he said, "Have you ever seen anything like that?" And so I just admitted it. I was like, "Yeah, I was there when this footage was taken. It was from the Theodore Roosevelt strike group in 2015. I know about it, and it's real." So, and then so your other question, was, if you can remind me.
Any potential hitchhiker effect, and then the relationship between when your abduction or in-person experiences happened, like where you think kind of the genesis of that. Is there a connection, I guess, is kind of what I was really getting at. Do you think there is a connection between you being on that ship and being there for that, and then now you're identified, and that's how you experience, etc.?
Yeah. So I will tell you, at the time that it was happening in 2015, I kind of had this very uneasy feeling about it. I had a very emotional response about it that I didn't understand, and I became very paranoid. I was like super paranoid in 2015 when this was happening, because I had this feeling that washed over me that like they're there for me, right? And someone was going to find that out, and it was going to be bad for me, and I was like, God, where is this feeling coming from? That is such fucking nonsense, right? Like, why am I paranoid about this? It doesn't even make any sense. And so I was like, I don't know anything about this, nothing, right? So why am I feeling this? It's crazy. So anyway, 2017 comes around. I see the footage, and yes, there is a definite link there, 100%. And people would call it a hitchhiker, but within my experiences, after seeing that article and then the close contact that I had with the phenomenon, I really began to understand that this had actually been happening my whole life. Right. But that I just wasn't. There were things in my childhood that fit this to a T, but I never really associated it with the phenomenon so much. I thought maybe, I don't know what I thought about it. I didn't think anything of it. Right. Things that happened when I was a kid, and then I'm like, oh my God, the phenomenon has been in my life all along. And so that's why I did know something about it. Right. But those things that happened weren't apparent until I started having these conscious contact experiences later in life. Right. And then I look back on my life and I'm like, oh my God, it's been there the whole time. Right. And I had no idea.
Is that comforting or scary?
At the time, it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. I'm not gonna lie, it made me feel like I was gonna throw up.
Yeah, like what else am I not remembering that happened?
Right. Right. Because at the time, like, you got to understand, I didn't know what this was yet. Right. And it was just this super creepy feeling that, oh my God, this thing has been watching me my whole life. Why has it been watching me? And what does this mean for me now? Right. What did this mean for my mom? Right. Because there were things with my mom even that I was like, oh my God, now it makes sense. Things that happened to her. Right. And so I saw this going back in my family. And then, like, there was this thing about the birth of my grandfather that kind of always never really sat well with me. Like, my great grandmother, after she gave birth to him, she went crazy, right? She went nuts, apparently. And she was committed to an insane asylum, and nobody ever heard from her or spoke to her again. And this didn't make sense to me because I knew that my mother's family at that point in time, they were incredibly wealthy, like very wealthy, right? Um, and so it was like, why was an insane asylum the best they could do? Right? That didn't make sense to me. But then in light of this, I started to think to myself, oh my God, this happened with my mother. Has happened throughout my family, my great grandmother. Like, am I going to end up in a fucking nut house now because of this? Like, what is happening? So it was a very unsettling and uneasy feeling for sure. UFO intros, you got something?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. I'm curious to know, like, what was the linking, not event, but like, what was the link that you made with the Gimbal event, aside from like was it the Theodore strike group, the naval strike group? Like, when you saw that video, when your brother sent it to you, what was it that really clicked?
Well, what really clicked is just that it was like, it was in my past, right? And I had kind of put it away. And I thought that was it. And that was not something that I was going to be revisiting. And then to see it, like, it's back, right? And I had this totally emotional reaction to it at the time, and it brought all of that back as well, right? Like, so it was like, I don't know, it was just, it was very uncomfortable. It was just, as I say, it was like a multi-layer of uncomfortable. Like, this is classified. Now here it is in the public, and I'm watching it on my cell phone. Why is that? That made me uncomfortable. Then knowing the emotional reaction to it I had at the time, that also made me uncomfortable. And so it was just this multifaceted discomfort, which is just like, it's really not a good place to be psychologically, right? It's not comfortable. And I don't know if any of you can relate to that. I think anybody who's an experiencer certainly can relate to that. But it was not something that I was familiar with or liked at the time.
It sounds like you took
UFO.
responsibility for it almost. It felt like your fault. Or that's almost what you were thinking at the time.
Yeah, it did. Like, I, because I felt like they were there for me, it was like, oh, I kind of feel uneasy about that because, like, now everybody's like kind of scrambling about this, and it's kind of my fault, and it just, like, that feels kind of gross too. You know what I mean?
You're out playing with your friends and your mom's screaming at you in the middle of the street, but mom is aliens.
Right, yeah. And so it's very uneasy. And I'll tell you, like, one thing that came up about my mom was that I remember, like, so we had been spending our summer on the East Coast, right? And my mom had to go back to the West Coast, back home, before the rest of us for some work or something like that. So she left a few days earlier or like a week earlier than we did. And I woke up one night and I heard like voice in the kitchen. So I get up and I go into the kitchen. My dad's there on the phone, and my older brother's there, and I was like, what's going on? It's like the middle of the night. Like, why is dad on the phone? And so, and this is before cell phones, obviously. So he's on the kitchen phone, and so he starts to tell me about how like mom had been asleep at the house. She went and picked up the dog because we had put her in like a kennel type situation, boarding. And so they were there at the house, and I guess my mom was asleep in the bedroom, and she woke up and saw like the figure of a man standing in the door of the bedroom looking at her. And so she started screaming at him to get out. And she goes and to the nightstand to grab her glasses, and she puts them on. And just as she puts them on, she sees this figure like leave, right? And go down the hallway. And so she calls the police, right? And they come over, they sweep the house. They don't find any signs of anyone. And so, I was like, well, who was it, to my brother. And he was like, oh, we think it was just somebody. It was like we live in a college town. So like, he's like, it was probably some college kid looking for the house down the street where they're always having parties. Right. And so I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like, because there's that house down the street. They were always having college parties, right? College kids live there. And so that was like kind of a normal explanation for that. But then, as this stuff started to come up, I was like, well, what was it about that made her wake up to see that? And why wasn't the dog barking? Right? Because I knew the dog, May, she used to always sleep in that hallway outside their bedroom. So why wasn't she barking and startled by this? Like, what is that all about? And then I started to piece that together, after I started seeing shadow figures and things like that, oh my God, my mom too, and so all of that, go ahead, UFO intros.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the space is like a free for all or if you're doing hands. But yeah, I don't feel like I got my question answered. What was it about the gimbal video that like made you connect it with what you experienced in 2015?
I would say that just because I realized that this was like non-human technology, like, well, whatever you would call UFOs, that in 2015 I realized, okay, well, all that's real, right? Like now I know that, but I'm not read into that program, so I don't know anything further than that, right, at this point. And so later when I started to see like shadow figures in the house and entities in my room, that's kind of where I put that together, because I kind of knew that when I was seeing something that looked very much not human, that there must be some kind of craft parked in the backyard, right, while this is happening. And so that's why I put that together with that.
Yeah,
But
I think you've shared this before, but maybe for anyone who hasn't heard it, what did you experience in the Navy in 2015 that you feel like links to the gimbal video?
Well, that was it, right? The gimbal video, right? Just seeing that video and knowing that was something that was not a part of our exercise, right? It wasn't a part of anything that should have been there. And yet it was operating kind of with impunity.
So you were on the ship when this happened, though. Do you have any memory from that time on the ship when this occurred?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I remember the whole thing. I remember all of it. And it was, as I said, I think I described this earlier just now, right? That that we all kind of knew that this was happening. Within Intel, I had an emotional reaction to it. Others did not, right? And I will say that later on deployment, I would pull this footage up and I would watch it over and over and over again, right? To the point I was like obsessed with it. And I remember we were on deployment and some of my guys walked past me and they looked at my computer screen and they were like, "Are you looking at that again?" They're like, "What are you doing?" And I was just like, "How do you not think this is the most amazing thing you've ever seen, right? How are you not mesmerized by this?" And they were just like, "Psh," and walked on, past me into the next room. They didn't really care. I did though. Why, Wolf? Go ahead.
Yeah. I don't know whether you can address this or not, but we've obviously seen very short clips. Is it fair to understand or think that there might be far more extended versions of these that might, let's say, make the case a little bit more clear that that there's something differential out there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so these clips that I saw were the clips that I saw, right? I didn't see an extended version of these clips. There certainly were more clips, and I'm not dumb, right? I mean, these were clips that were clipped for a purpose. They were just it's samples, right, or examples taken out of a much longer video, right? So there is more. I saw more, right? I saw there were other clips. This wasn't it. And I think that there were other clips that were much more compelling than the Go Fast or the Gimbal clip, right? But those are what we have. Public anyway.
Can you describe the clips that you saw, contrasting with what's been publicly released?
I don't want to, but I will say that I know. I'm sorry.
No, I meant
I'm
a
sorry.
thumbs up. I meant a thumbs up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't want to, just because I don't want to get in trouble. Like, I was warned that I have to just stick to my own experiences when I speak about these things, and to not delve into other things. So I just I don't want to, but I will say that there's other footage out there. There are, and this is not anything new that anyone else isn't saying in this space that came out and is talking about this now. Of course, there are other photographs, there are other videos, things that are crystal clear, that there is no doubt that is what you're looking at in a photograph or in a video. Like, there are things that could be released that there would be no doubt. And why those things haven't been released, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me, to be honest.
You feel like there's anything in that footage that would either prove the reality of the phenomena or give away, right, sources and methods type of stuff?
I don't think that there was anything in there that would give away sources and methods. I mean, I will say though that when that footage was released, there was there were some pretty good detectives, right, that worked on that footage, and they were able to nail down dates based on weather that they saw in the video, and stuff like that. So, I mean, generally, locations and things like that are classified not because they're sources or methods, but because those are sensitive, right? It's a sensitive topic to be talking about where our assets are and when they're there. If you can nail it down to a specific weather pattern, then you know exactly where they are, right? And that's never a good thing, that anyone knows exactly where you are. So that the locations are generally classified at a certain level.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so if you're able to determine that, then that's not a good thing. So maybe that's it. I don't know. I don't know. But now that that's out there, I don't see why they can't release the rest of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, unless there was maybe something else in the remainder of the footage that would be like a tell as far as the weather was concerned, which might help people
Well,
isolate while we're training.
honestly, I don't think it's the weather that was so intriguing about those videos, obviously, because I said that I do believe that there are more compelling videos, right? And perhaps that's why they are still classified, because they are so compelling, because it wouldn't leave a lot of doubt, right?
Okay, so there was something then in the remainder of the footage that wasn't publicly released that would definitely not leave any doubt in anyone's mind that this was something anomalous and not just like a,
Well, yes,
blurry blown up video.
in the other clips, yes, I would say that is true, 100%.
That makes more sense. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else have anything? If not, I'm going to go ahead and close the space. But anyway, you guys, thanks for listening. It was a great conversation.
Jan, give it about 10 seconds to end, because otherwise it clips it at the end.
Okay. What do you mean, give it 10 seconds to end? So what should I do?
After you stop talking, just give it about 10 seconds before you close.
Okay.
Yeah, the listeners hear what we're saying right now. They'll hear it 10 seconds from now. You can judge emojis based on that as well. But yeah, just wait a good 10, 15 seconds before you close. I missed the first part of this space, Matthew. I don't know if you are on a time crunch, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on the Karl Nell, like what you think his most important comment was. I can go back and listen to the recording though.
Yeah, well, there was no one in the room when I spoke about it. So maybe it would be useful if I just kind of restated it here at the end anyway. So anyway, I noticed that a lot of people were posting comments and things from Age of Disclosure, and they were, clipping things that Karl Nell had said. And in my comment, I said, in one of the comments that I posted, I said, with everyone, posting these Karl Nell quotes, I figured I would post what I believe is the most important comment he's ever made publicly about this topic, right? And so I posted a video with Jesse Michels where he was interviewing Karl Nell and Diana Pasulka at a conference, and one of the things that Karl Nell said, it was regarding like UFOs in the Bible and UFOs in religion, obviously because that's Diana Pasulka's specialty. But anyway, one of the things he said was that the pyramid texts, right, are the largest set of religious texts anywhere in the world, in any religion, living or dead. It's kind of the largest set of texts that we have that are complete from any one religion. And so he said Egyptology, or when they the Western thought on when they went in and started studying things and came up with the idea of Egyptology as a study, they kind of looked at these texts and took them in a very materialistic kind of interpretation, right? And so they described these texts as funerary. In other words, that they were for the purposes of funerals, right? Like these are the things that you would recite at a funeral, or the hymns you would recite at a funeral, or the things that you would do surrounding funerary process. And so that's how they interpreted those texts. But he says that there's another way of thinking about those texts, in that they are not funerary, but they're actually esoteric, meaning they're interpretive works. And there is another interpretation of those works, in that those rites that are delivered that we think of as funerary are not in fact funerary. These are rites and rituals that people would participate in when they were alive, right?
And
So these were
more initiatory, right?
yes, and that they were they were an initiatory experience into the mysteries of that religion, right? And we see these types of initiatory experiences in terms of religious structure in all kinds of religions, right? And so Egypt's religion is no different than, and kind of gave birth to Christianity, right? Christianity in its beginnings was practiced some of these same rites, where these were things that people could participate in when they were living, and they were not funerary, right? The idea was that that you could then go through this and have a religious experience at the end, right? Just like the Greek mysteries or the Roman mysteries. All of these religions had mystery schools. Christianity today does not, right? Because the thing to understand about Christianity today is that it is a dying religion. And it offers no such thing, right? It cannot connect you to anything that is real. And because of that, it's dying. And that just so happens to be the time in which we live, right? So we tend to look at other religions through this lens of kind of a materialistic, nonsensical belief. And we think that, oh, the Egyptians had the same types of nonsensical beliefs, right? And that's just what religion is worldwide. But that's not the case, right? Religion was actually putting you in touch with something real. And what I describe that as is a change, right? A psychological change that people enter into beyond adulthood, right? In that we all go through these changes throughout life in terms of human development. There's infancy, childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. And we all know that those changes bring with them, an expanse of awareness, deep changes in perception, how we perceive the world, and changes in the brain, its structure, right? And so what these rites and these initiations were doing were to bring you into this next phase beyond adulthood that not everyone experiences, but that everyone can if they chose to. Go ahead, UFO. You had your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. Posting something here in your thread. This is a weird connection that I didn't make until you just were speaking about this, because I wrote, I read your post you made the other day, but and I'm not advocating for anything here, or I'm not being a proponent of a religion that I left over a decade ago, but so the founder of Mormonism, Joseph Smith, came across some Egyptian what were known to be like funeral rites. Like that's how it was interpreted, as like these were some kind of like funeral manuscripts. That's what like critics of these hieroglyphics that he I guess used as like a way to sort of as a catalyst, I guess, to his quote unquote revelatory powers as a prophet or whatever. But these are Egyptian manuscripts. The manuscripts, or sorry, the facsimiles themselves, I put your thread and up in the nest, but a lot of basically like the sorry, kind of a lot of thoughts in my head right now. We could talk about this privately or in another space maybe, but essentially Joseph Smith took these like Egyptian manuscripts and translated them into what is known now as the Pearl of Great Price, which is the Book of Abraham, the Book of Moses, which are like different takes, I guess you could say, on Genesis in the Bible, in the Old Testament. And then there's some other writings in the Pearl of Great Price as well. But it's just interesting to me because these are some of like the core texts in Mormonism that have to do with the initiatory process in the Mormon temples, which then you get into like Freemasonry and stuff. But I think it's interesting that these manuscripts, right, that Joseph Smith used as a catalyst to reveal whatever this Pearl of Great Price, which is separate from the Book of Mormon, but they were criticized as merely like funeral texts, right? Yet these were some of the same texts that Mormons use for the initiation process that they go through in their temples. And so just I don't know, the thing that Karl Nell said in that clip, because I went and watched it several times to try and grasp what you were getting at with your post, and I'm glad you clarified there. I don't know. It's just maybe a weird coincidence, if nothing else.
Well, what I'll say about, Mormonism and stuff like that, I don't know a lot about it. I to be honest, I don't. Even though I grew up in Arizona, and there's like a lot of Mormons out here.
Were you in Tempe or Mesa?
Yeah, I'm in Tempe.
Yeah, there's a lot of Mormons there. I have relatives there.
Yeah. Right. And I growing up, I was never religious. I never believed in that stuff. And so like the Mormons were always just kind of weird to me. Like I remember this girl that I sat next to in English class. She was like, "Oh, you should come over to my house for dinner with my family." And I was like, "Oh, that would be nice." And she's like, "And we can talk about Jesus." And I was like, maybe not, but yeah. So anyway, what I will say about Joseph Smith is that I think that he was probably someone who encountered this, going from adulthood into the next phase, right, of human development. And for whatever reason, I guess he decided to try to form some kind of religion out of that. I don't believe that that's the right way to do it. I think I think today we can talk about these things in terms of psychology and human development, and it's not weird, right? And it doesn't need to be made weird, but I think that it will put religion in perspective if you take that lens and you then look on religion with that lens, right? And certainly in Joseph Smith's time, he wouldn't have had access to like Jungian psychology and stuff like that because he obviously predates that. But I think that I think that that's the correct. Obviously, I think that's the correct way to look at this. We don't need to form a new religion. But I do believe that that's kind of what Diana Pasulka is getting at, is that these initiatory type experiences that people have with the phenomenon is something that has always been with us. And so you have religions that start off with this initiatory process at their center, right? And then they gradually degrade throughout time. And the religion dies, right? And right now we see that we are living in a time when the religion is dying. And so there's going to be something else that comes up to take its place. And my hope would be that it would be something more psychology based, more rationally based, more based in, just the study of human growth and development. And that we would take that kind of approach to it rather than something that could degrade and become nonsensical like religions do, because they're made of esoteric stories. It doesn't need to be esoteric. We can kind of just talk about it very plainly in terms of what it is, right? And that's not weird. And so that's where I'm approaching it from. Does it make sense?
Yeah. No, thank you, Matt. I always appreciate when you open up spaces talk like this. Thanks again.
Yeah, no problem.